Welcome to the Association of Educational Therapists webinar, Starting on the Right Foot, Embracing the Challenges of a New School Year. AET is the National Professional Association for Educational Therapists. AET sets standards for the ethical and professional practice of educational therapy and provides ongoing professional development for its members and the public. Now, through the miracle of technology, today's presenters span the country, and I'm delighted to introduce them to you. Starting on the West Coast, Marydee Sklar is with us from Portland, Oregon. She's the author of Seeing My Time, a program that makes time comprehensible and manageable for people who, as she puts it, are time challenged. Marydee is also the author of the book, 50 Tips to Help Students Succeed, Develop Your Students' Time Management and Executive Skills for Life. She offers training courses for her Seeing My Time program, both online and in person. Marydee will be presenting at AET's annual conference in October. So if you want to learn more, come to the conference and hear Marydee. And jumping to the East Coast, Susan Micari comes to us from New York City, where she's a board-certified educational therapist in private practice. Susan has written about learning issues for various periodicals, including AET's journal, The Educational Therapist. She works with middle school, high school, and adult students who've been diagnosed with various learning difficulties and coaches executives with ADHD and learning issues as well. Hello. And linking the two coasts appropriately, we have our moderator, Laura Doto. Laura is an educational therapist in private practice in the Chicago area. She holds a master's degree from the University of Chicago and has served as a learning consultant at the university and at private schools. Laura has presented workshops on time management, learning and writing skills, and technology integration. She works with students of all ages, including medical students who have learning challenges. Please welcome Marydee, Susan, and Laura.
Thank you, Nan. Welcome everyone from all across the country and maybe even the world. I'm so happy to be moderating this conversation with two of my favorite people, Susan in New York and Marydee in Portland, Oregon. This webinar idea was hatched over dinner, I think tapas in Virginia a couple of years back, where we thought how cool would it be if the three of us got together and had a conversation. And Nan's webinar committee has facilitated that, so pleased to be here. You'll note from the agenda that's on your screen that our conversation is really going to cover three different topics related to what's going on in the brain when anxiety is happening, how we can help structure environments for supporting kids who might be challenged or further challenged by pending anxiety, and also we want to talk about how we manage our own cognitive and emotional space as parents, as educators, as clinicians, because we have to take as good care of ourselves as we do of our students. So you'll note that our goal is to introduce strategies, and we will be talking for about 40 minutes, and then we will open up the conversation for some question and answer time. If at any point during the conversation you have a question, feel free to type it in. Nan will be moderating it from there. And then when the Q&A session comes up, I will be happy to pose a few to our speakers. So let's get started. Marydee, I'd like you to start today and talk about how when you work with families on issues that are related to time management, why do you always start with the brain?
Well, what I've learned after many years of working with this issue of kids having trouble getting things done in school, turning in papers, losing things, future projects, all the stresses connected to it. Typically what people do is they start with the strategies. Use your planner, use your timer, and you don't get a lot of buy-in. And it's because if you've had trouble getting things done, you are defensive. You have a lot of emotional scarring going on. So I don't start with the strategies because I have to acknowledge the emotional part of our brain, and I depersonalize it by not saying what you're doing wrong looking at a kid, but just saying, we're going to talk about your brain and how your brain connects to your behavior. So by starting with the brain, I take the guilt away. It's not you're a bad person. It's how your brain works. Let's find out how your brain works. And then once we know the why, we can go to the how to take care of the problems, what strategies we need to use.
Great, thank you. And I know because we're talking about getting organized and starting on the right foot and all the strategies, I'm hoping that you can also kind of create a foundation for us by talking about the executive functions that are going on and the developmental trajectories that we need to keep in mind when we're working with students.
Okay, great. Do you have on the next slide? Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. So it's real important as parents and as educators to realize that the brain executive functions, those are the parts of our brain that are located behind our forehead in our prefrontal cortex or our frontal lobes. And they're the processes in our brain that help us to get things done, to choose the behaviors that we're going to do in order to reach goals, those kinds of things. And this chart is really helpful. What it's got here is it's got on the left side, and going up is the maturity over time, okay? And whether you become a grown-up or not, a grown-up brain, I tell the kids. And then the bottom line there is the age that these particular skills come on board. And that gold bar we're going to talk about a little bit later. So just kind of hold that in your brain. But what I want you to focus first on is the green line that talks about self-control. And self-control is the ability to delay gratification, wait. I won't play the video game now. I'll do my homework first. Okay, that's a pretty complex executive skill. That is self-control. So if you notice self-control, it starts pretty young. But then if you notice right about middle school, there's kind of a bar there, the MS stands for middle school. Right about middle school there, it gets kind of a little plateau, because it's going up and then it kind of slows down. Well, that's right when we hit middle school, when the demands to be able to manage more things go up. Multiple classes, multiple teachers, multiple subjects, multiple deadlines, becomes much more complex. And these kids don't have the capacity to control themselves and maintain that, ability to monitor all of this stuff over time. So that's one of their issues that hits at middle school. Then the next one that's really important in our executive functions is working memory. And working memory is that conscious part of our brain that we're using right now as we're thinking. And all of our executive functions, all of our learning goes through our working memory system in our brain. So look at how long it takes for that to mature. It's not maturing until somewhere in those almost mid-20s. That's for the typical person. So what that looks like is the typical adult can hold on to approximately 4 to 7 chunks of information at a time. So it's like you have a little puzzle board. And every time you have a thought, here's one thought, it goes on your board. Here's another thought, here's another thought. Well, when you get to over 4 to 7 of them, one of those chunks is going to have to fall off. It just won't fit. So what it looks like when you're working with your kids is if you do something like, hurry up, you need to go upstairs, take up your clean clothes and take up your books. And then when you get upstairs, I want you to make sure that you put away your clean clothes and then bring down your dirty clothes. And don't forget to bring down your soccer clothes for later. And your bed better be made before I come upstairs. Well, what just happened with that kid is that you just overloaded their little working memory capacity. So half of what you said probably fell off because they don't even have a working memory typically of over 4, all right? And then as they walk upstairs, they're thinking about other things. So all the things you asked them to do fell off their board. Okay, so they're not going to be able to remember what you did. So when you're giving, a good strategy is to remember to not overload their working memory. So if you want them to do something, give them 1 or 2 things to do, and maybe that'll increase the odds of them actually doing it. Then the next one is goal setting and problem solving. Now, this is big, particularly goal setting. That represents future thinking, caring about the future plans. So see how long it takes to develop that one. It goes way up there. It takes a long time for that to become important, all right? So here you are as a parent telling your kid, you've got to get good grades. You know, if you don't get good grades in this class, you're not going to get into a good college. And if you don't get into a good college, you're not going to get a good job. And you're not, you know, and your whole life's going to be a disaster. Well, you know, kids don't care about that future. They only care about what's in the present. And it takes a long time for them to develop that internal connection to goals. Now, there are some kids out there who have that, but many of them do not. And then there's problem solving. Okay, often referred to as metacognition, the ability to think about your thinking. That ties in there. So that's what happens when, for instance, your kids aren't starting homework and you're just getting mad at them because, you know, sit down and get started. Well, sometimes they're stuck on something and they don't know how to problem solve to get around it. They don't understand the directions. They may have lost the directions. And so in their little minds, it's like, I lost my directions. I can't do it. Whereas your brain, this is another strategy to ask that question, where is the confusion? Are you stuck? How can I get you started? Because they can't problem solve. You can go say, oh, well, we'll just contact the teacher. Oh, we'll contact your friend. You can do that, but their brains can't. So what you need to do is realize that this brain development takes a long time. In fact, generally speaking, the current research is between the ages of 25 and 30 plus. So that's a long time for that brain to mature. Now that gold bar over there, what that represents is the ADHD brain, because that brain tends to be about 3 years delayed in terms of its executive functions. So I had this come to light the other day, really in my face. I had this really tall 14-year-old. This kid was practically touching the ceiling in my my office. And he was so sweet. He's so cute. He's getting ready to go off to to freshman in high school. But when I showed him this and said, you know, your brain is very ADHD. Your brain's about 3 years delayed. So that means you're like an 11-year-old going off to high school. And he was like, so you have to understand that the expectations are really high on these kids, but we have to understand what their brain can do, because you can't do what you can't do. So that's where the parents become and the professionals around them become really important to support that brain, because a lot of kids are giving up because the demands are too high for them. So that's why I start with the brain. It's when they understand it, the parents understand, and the kids stop beating themselves up. It's like, oh, okay, little by little, we're going to get better.
Thank you. That's so helpful. I know that took a little bit of time, but I tend to be fascinated particularly by what's going on developmentally in that executive functions. And one of the things you mentioned was the anxiety that gets built up on the parents' perspective as they look at the expectations of teachers, of schoolwork. And as a former teacher myself, I know that's why I would write everything down as a reference for students so they could refer back. They did not need to hold it all in their head. And actually, most teachers will be happy to communicate expectations beyond those 2 or 3 start tasks, so that students can keep that goal in mind and the problem solving as well. So thank you. Going back to the brain, just one more quick time, is there something else we should know as we support our students going through a successful year with regard to what's going on within the limbic system of the brain? I know that's something Susan's going to further talk about, but Marydee, if you could just spend a quick moment using your analogy of the bully in the brain.
Okay, the way the brain works, let's imagine that my hands are the brain, all right, and that my arms are the brain stem, and I were to cut this brain in half. The thing that you need to know about the brain is it develops from the inside out and from the back to the front. So if I were to open up this brain, deep inside, you have the limbic system. And people often focus on the amygdala as being the sort of the push button of our emotional brain. And the amygdala acts as the kind of the security guard in our brain. It's like everything coming in. Are we safe? Do I feel good? Am I going to be okay? Am I going to do all right? Those are all strong emotions that are happening in your kids right now, many of them as they get closer to school. Oh, is this going to be as bad as last year? Oh, is the teacher going to like me? Are the kids going to be nice? What's happening is the amygdala is getting activated and it's pushing cortisol into your system, that stress hormone. And it stops your brain from being able to communicate. So the thing to know about the cortisol is that when that's in your brain, you can't communicate with somebody. What happens is it gets into, these are my neurons, all right? And in between the neurons, there's fluid. And when the cortisol gets in there, it stops the communication, the transfer of information from neuron to neuron. So you can't think. So if you have a child who's already really anxious, and you go, honey, calm down, you're going to be all right. It's no big deal. What you're doing actually is pushing their button some more. So they're getting more cortisol into their system. So what you need to do is be very calm yourself, take a deep breath. And this is hard to do because your bully takes off, because as a parent, your anxiety goes sky high also. So the first task is to take a deep breath, lean back, stretch like this, put your elbows back, belly out. That's going to calm your brain because that's going to activate something called your parasympathetic nervous system. And it's going to neutralize that cortisol so you can be calmer. So stretching, let your kids stretch, teach them to stretch, and then when they've calmed down, you can have that conversation. So the bully in the brain realize it can be in control, and you can't learn, you can't talk until the bully is calm. And it takes about 90 seconds for the cortisol to dissipate.
Thank you. So helpful. Susan,
yes.
Tell us about some of those wonderful triggers that make all that happen in the brain.
Sure. So when kids are anticipating going back to school and when parents are anticipating their children going back to school, I think the number one thing kids worry about is, will I like my teacher? Will the teacher like me? Will she or he understand me? Their kids also worry a great deal about social acceptance. Am I going to find my place in this group? Am I going to be considered smart or athletic or whatever the gold standard in the group is for acceptance, right? So it's social acceptance. Another thing kids worry about, a big trigger for anxiety, is just the reintroduction of a routine after a summer of relative freedom. And with that, if you've had a relaxing summer, you haven't practiced particularly much of the skills that you're going to be called on to use very shortly, that can call up a great deal of anxiety, especially for our kids, because our kids are not excellent planners yet, are they? And they're not necessarily particularly good at calling upon the skills, retrieving the skills that are weaker for them than they may be for other kids at the same age. So there's pressure on weaker skills, there's the reintroduction of a schedule, and there is especially the notion of can I become an understood entity to my teacher? Will my teacher like me?
So how do we address some of those what ifs and can I's and all that rumination that's occurring? I know you've got some really great routines and strategy suggestions. What are some that you found particularly helpful?
I like setting a visual schedule with kids. We can post a schedule together that tells us when we're going to do the necessary practice to get our skills back, right? I explain to kids, the skills are in there, you just haven't used them. So with a little practice, we're going to retrieve them, or we're going to get them back. So then step one might be posting a schedule of practice for the last couple of weeks before school. Another one might be setting a goal together. One of the things that can help calm parents and students is sharing the setting of a goal. for what we'd like to get done these last couple of weeks. Oh, are we behind on summer reading? We better make that a priority. Can't remember the times tables? Well, neither can I. Let's practice that together till we get it. And making something that's rather, that's human, that's mutual, that where the goal is something that you've reached together with your child and that you can practice and track the progress of quite easily on your chart. So it's reading, writing, and retrieving concepts and procedures. That's what we need to do.
Wonderful. We're going to talk a little bit more about some specific suggestions in a little bit, but I'm going to ask Marydee to come back to the screen and talk very specifically about routines and environment and what effective time management has to do with all of this.
Okay, so the thing about routines is that they make it easier for people because it goes out of our prefrontal cortex. When there's a routine, we don't have a routine, we constantly have to think. We have to keep it in that little working memory we were talking about earlier, all right? We have to keep all those ideas in there, and we become stressed if we lose them. We have this vague feeling that I'm not doing something that I need to be doing. So routines offload, take off the pressure from our executive system. It actually leaves this prefrontal cortex part of our brain and ends up back in the lower regions of our brain where they become routines, where we don't have to think about them. It's like tying our shoes are routines, brushing our teeth are routines. So very important, and it's a good thing to do right now, even if for some of you schools may have already started, but it's just ramping up for others. To start establishing how long does it take you to get up in the morning? From when somebody says get up, how long does it take your feet to get on the floor? How long does it take to get in the shower? How long does it take to eat breakfast? So that they actually start timing that and getting an awareness of what time do I have to get up in order to get to school on time without being anxious. So setting up a routine like that, and so an evening routine ahead of time of working on what can I set up the night before? My clothes, part of my lunch, my shoes, my jacket, so that I don't have to think about it in the morning. Because all the things that you can offload out of your brain are very important. So that's why, is it just makes your life easier if you have a routine. We always do this day or this time, set that up, and that will be easier for everybody.
So you're really creating some automaticity there.
Yes.
And when things go awry, there's something to go back to.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you. Susan, do you want to chime in on some of the considerations as we're thinking about practicing and gathering evidence and setting up routines in unknown spaces?
Okay, well, let's make the unknown known. Let's start there and set up a space with your child's cooperation and help that feels useful, that is work-oriented, that does suggest here's where we get things done. You may have noticed, as those of you who are ed therapists, when you're working with a child, there's a point at which they can do the work that you've asked them to do extremely well in your space. And then you send them home and the parent says, but it all falls apart when they get home. I'm not seeing the same level of organization. Well, of course, we're scaffolding support for children, but there's also such a thing as space-dependent learning. So setting up your home environment to be extremely clear and simple and useful is great. Also, remember that practice is practice. It's not perfect. All you have to do is take up the schedule that you've set and give it a shot. My new favorite thing to do to help kids, and I'm helping kids at all levels and ages with this, is retrieval practice in the form of quizzing. I took a college student the other day and made up a quiz from a textbook chapter she hadn't read yet. And the point is, it's okay if you fail. You're gonna. But it's also going to alert you to what you absolutely need to learn. And bing, just like that, people's willingness, their ability to learn and retrieve information can improve. At least that's what Micari, science reporter at the New York Times, who wrote How We Learn, is telling us, and I'm saying it's working for my kids. So you can also schedule reading time together, math time together. Make sure you're available for your child. You don't have to hover. You're not going to do the practice for your child, but you're going to be there to answer a question. Maybe you're reading with the child, or maybe you're doing your own reading while your kids are doing theirs, but just to be available. And then the other thing we want to do is, in setting our goals and in practicing, we want them to set aside a little time for feedback. We have to say, how did this go today? How did it go practicing your times tables, or practicing your algebra, or using your geometry proofs today during that practice time you set? What worked? What didn't? What do we need to take to the teacher to say, I need a bit of help with this? And what can we get back on our own? So it's essentially making your routines and retrieving your knowledge and making known what you need then to go for further help with.
So this idea of practice and rehearsal really allows to develop some routines and correct some routines and strategies when the anxiety is not there, because it really is all about practice.
Yes, and we can break up the routine. Let's say a practice isn't working. Okay, start at the end. Pick a different chapter. Do something new. Pay attention to breathing. Work on the mindfulness research, which is in all the John Kabat-Zinn's research suggests that we truly can calm the body and the mind by calming the body, by breathing. So let's do some of that. Let's not, we don't have to be chained to our routine, but we want to use feedback in real time to modify it if we need to, and to evaluate our progress.
I'm gonna ask both of you the same question at this point, because my executive functions are being somewhat challenged with this working memory and keeping track of our slideshow as we go here. That's the beauty of an impromptu conversation with some planning. But I would like you each to comment, Marydee first, on what your experience has been with teachers, with school staff, as you anticipate the school year with a student. How open and accessible do teachers tend to be, and what suggestions might you offer parents or students to do some of that rehearsal within the environment of the school?
Mm-hmm. By and large, teachers want your kids to be successful, and they want to get off on your kids to get off on the right foot. So if you have a child who does have a lot of anxiety, do go to the school and visit. Arrange to meet the teacher, arrange to spend some time in the environment. One of the things, particularly if they're going off to middle school, one of the things that you can do is get the teacher their schedule as soon as you can get it, and then help them get a school map, all right, that shows them where they are, and help them walk from class to class. And get a timer and time. How long does it take them to walk from each one of these classes? So they have a sense of how fast they have to move between bells to get places. Another thing that can help with the school thing is if they have lockers for the first time, teach them how to get into that locker. If you don't have time at that particular place, they don't know what locker is going to be, you can go to a hardware store or wherever and you get a lock that's much like it, and teach them how to open the lock. How to practice that, because that'll make them feel very competent when they're in the hallways. They'll know how to get into those lockers, and they can help the kids who don't know how to get into the lockers. So that's one way about the environment. And then making sure that you go in and chat with the teachers and let them get to know your child just a bit. I know we want to teach our kids to be self-advocates, but that's a very mature thing to ask of kids. So it's good to help help them get to know those teachers and help them understand that, we're working on self-advocacy, but we're going to make sure that we're in the background supporting them as they develop those skills. So yeah, teachers can be great. I was a classroom teacher when we want our kids to be successful, but just set up the environment, become comfortable in the physical space as well as with the people who are there.
Thank you. I think it's also important to note that first week of school, the teachers are almost as frenzied as the students. And if at first you don't get a reply to an inquiry from a teacher, try again.
Yes.
So I'll advocate a little bit for the teachers, but I also know that the best of intentions are there from a faculty perspective. Timing is critical for sure. So thank you. We're going to go into talking about being a time scientist. So as you're practicing, as you're rehearsing, particularly as it relates to how long it takes to get things done, Marydee, could you use the time scientist slide and talk about what that's all about?
Okay, the thing about time is that most kids, many adults, have no idea how long it takes to do things. Our brain plays with time. We think some things go fast, some things go slow, and anything that we don't like, we tend to wait in our brain. It's going to take longer. Okay, it becomes uglier just because we don't want to do it. So what happens for kids often is they'll avoid homework because in their brain, they're saying it's going to take forever. So I don't want to start now because I don't have any fun, so I'll start later. And then what happens is they're up too late and they fall apart because their brains are exhausted because they waited too long, but they don't understand how long things take. So I always have my clients become time scientists. So I have them pick a task, like I said earlier about just timing their morning routine, but I'll have them pick simple tasks. If they have chores, how long does it take them to the dishwasher? I have them guess, how long do you think it's going to take you? And then push a stopwatch function and find out how long does it take. Usually a lot less than they think. Well, likewise for homework, very important for you to collect data on that. So at the beginning weeks, it takes a while for teachers to ramp up the homework, but as it starts to pile up there, I want you to start taking note of how long does it take to do a math assignment? How long does it take to do the language arts? How long does it take for me to do my packet? How long, each page of something. And you want to collect it over more than one time. Remember, to get an average, you should have 5 different timings, and then you divide it by 5 and come up with an average. But you need to have some sense of how long things take. So very, very important, because then you need to place it within, okay, after school, we've got 4 hours that we have available for homework, and how can we fit in those little pieces of homework into the space of time that we have. So being a time scientist is really valuable for adults as well as kids. How long does it take for us to do things? And this form, you can actually download at blamethebrain.com if you need to use it. You don't have to use it, but it's a record of keeping track of how long things really take, because most of us are just guessing. We need to actually collect data.
Great. And I did put the analog clock in the slide there to really emphasize the fact that a lot of kids who struggle with executive function challenges do not have a good sense of time. And one of the tips and tricks I know that you use is to actually use an analog clock so that you can see time.
Right.
And so that students can see the time pass. On a digital clock, it's pretty automatic, but as you're watching the hands of the face go around, you can see it's a full revolution of time. It's a half a revolution. Things like that really helpful in the long run. I'm going to ask Susan to also talk at this point, but I'm going to preface it with a question that was asked by one of our viewers. Lisa Dickinson says, what can you do as a parent for those teachers who are really stressing this idea of self-advocacy? So thinking about rehearsal and practice and working with teachers, maybe you can gear your answer a little bit to help respond to that question of how do you help parents, how do you help teachers when the teachers are stressing self-advocacy?
Right. If the teacher has a fixed idea of what self-advocacy looks like, then we as parents can model a couple of things for our children and with them. We can model tolerating uncertainty, tolerating discomfort with a new goal. We can collect information with our children present from the teacher about what does that look like. So we can ask, we can, in our visit, we can say, what does self-advocacy mean? And define that so that our children have a better idea. And then we can also, in a sense, advocate from behind the scenes and say to the teacher, maybe we can pick 3 or 2 of those fabulous self-advocacy goals and work on 1 or 2 of those first. In other words, giving the teacher the idea that this kid is a work in progress. So managing our own anxiety, not saying, what do you mean? my kid has to do this by herself. Not adding a poor model of managing stress ourselves to our children is very helpful. Modeling being calm and being mindful, negotiating, these things would be fairly helpful to our children. And I think it's decent to explain your own anxiety to the child, something along the lines of, when anybody asks you a question and I think it's going to be hard for you, it just kills me. I can't stand it. I want to start breathing into a paper bag. I'm sorry, I'm the anxious one here. It's mom. And then in some ways, our children can begin to detach from our anxiety so that they can kind of just have their own and not feel like they're letting down the gods and goddesses of their universe if they can't, hit a goal right away. So I think there's that planning for stressful transitions. You can say, your teacher's got this one idea about you saying everything that needs to be said. We can rehearse that. You can practice with me, and you don't have to ever be perfect, because I don't know what perfect is, and your teacher doesn't know either. But we can work on it together. Let's pick one thing that you could tell your teacher about how hard it is for you to sit still. That would be helpful for your teacher to know. Let's practice that first, and then we'll talk about getting homework done. We'll do all those things, but we'll do them one by one. And then you're on your own, sweetie. I can't do it for you. I'm not going to, but I am going to be right here to talk it over at the end of the day with you. You can tell me all about it, and we'll plan for the next day. It's going to take a little courage. So we're kind of trying to help institute a bit of modeling of tolerating anxiety and modeling ways you could reach courage by trying things that are hard.
Excellent. Thank you. Marydee, do you want to add anything else with regard to
one little tip that I use to help kids be self-advocates, but a little less directly perhaps, is many of the kids identify as being visual learners, visual thinkers. And what happens in a setting for teachers, they'll say, well, they don't raise their hands. They're not getting help. Well, if the kids can ask for help, what starts happening is the teacher walks over and they give them, and the kid's sitting there going, and then as soon as the teacher leaves, what happens? It's gone, okay? So then they don't want to ask again because they just asked. So what I have them do is get a memory book. And usually it's like a composition book or something. And I set this up with the teacher in advance, saying, my child has trouble remembering a lot of things because a lot of the kids with learning disability or learning differences have working memory issues. So I have this working memory book. And if a teacher comes to help them at their desk or they go up to the teacher, if the teacher will leave behind some kind of concrete information, a visual drawing, an example of how you did the problem, leave something of what they said concretely behind, then when the teacher leaves, the child has that to hold on to. So that's a way of saying, okay, before you go, can you make sure, am I doing it right? And is my understanding correct? That piece of paper can hold on to their working memory. And that's something that's a part of being a self-advocate. And the other quick thing I want to say is, if your kids are going to IEP meetings, train your kids to go to them actually, but train the kids to go up to each one of the teachers at the meeting and shake their teacher's hands and say, thank you for being here. I want to learn.
That's such an important point. And actually one of the questions as we get into some of our Q&A is related to IEPs. So I'm going to circle back on that one. We are basically at the point in our conversations where we'll be opening opening the forum up to questions. And I already have 3 open here, which I'll continue to moderate as we go through. But I'm going to turn off the slideshow so that we can go into full screen mode with our conversationalists here. And here we go. So the first question, since it gets at IEPs, I'm going to ask it. This is Tavia Lawson, says, the school my son attends keeps trying to get him to attend IEP meetings to self-advocate for himself, but he does not want to attend the meetings. He gets anxiety, panics, and is fearful. The question is, what can I do to help him? I'm going to ask for a little bit of clarification, Tavia, on how old your child is, keeping the executive function developmental list in mind. And Susan, I'll ask you to answer first with regard to how to help keep the anxiety and panic in check. And then Marydee, back to you to help develop a script here.
Have we got an age on the child?
So hopefully it's going to come up.
Well, let's go for it anyhow. I think it's first very helpful to elicit some specific fears from the child. What is it exactly that's going to be scary? Well, they're all going to be looking at me and they're going to judge me. Oh, they're going to judge you. What do you think they're going to be thinking? Well, they're going to know I can't do stuff, and then they're going to want me to do it, and they don't understand. And, you know,
this is a 15-year-old boy, so 15.
Okay, well, he may not cry in quite that tone of voice then, but inside he's crying. Okay, we break down the fears and we can say, you don't have to be at this whole meeting for all of it, but I would like you to tolerate some of this uncertainty and fear. Here's how we'll do it. You're going to come at the beginning, and just as Marydee said, meet everyone, shake hands, present yourself, and say thank you for being there. I think you can tell them why this meeting is so hard for you, and you might ask them and take the initiative to say, here are some things I would like to have in my IEP, and be active that way. Remember that this is a chance for you to ask for things that would be most helpful to you. So being specific about the fears and breaking them into individual small fears instead of being overwhelmed by the large thing, presenting yourself for a portion of the meeting as a first step toward handling these big stressful meetings, and using that time to take action to say, I need this, this, and this. These would be helpful for me. I need extra time. I would very much like to have your PowerPoint slides, or to have what's on your whiteboard in advance so I can pay attention, for instance. I'd like to use those with my reading so I know what's important for me to learn as I'm doing the reading, because it's hard for me to know the big picture from the detail. For instance, you can break that down, and your educational therapist can help you develop that plan. Your ed therapist can also be there with you and give you, the students, some backup. And then I think always, always, always a bit of rehearsal, not too much, tolerating that uncertainty, knowing you're going to feel anxious. It's not about not feeling that, it's always there. But we're going to manage it a little bit better. And then at the end, the most helpful thing for developing metacognition is eliciting some feedback. Talk it over with your parents. Talk it over with your ed therapist. How did that go? Your ed therapist might say, boy, I know you said you were nervous, but you spoke up so loudly and clearly for that one thing you really needed that they didn't understand. I was impressed. So you can build strength through community. In some ways, we have to teach these folks at the IEP that we're all at the table together. We're not opponents.
Right. Very helpful, that collaborative model, and you bring the child right in.
Yeah.
Marydee, more on self-advocacy with
I want to I agree with everything that she said. And I think that when she talks about rehearsal, what that looks like for me is it's role playing. So I do that a lot with kids where, okay, I'm going to be the teacher's there, you're going to be the student, and what are you going to say? And you just practice it over and over and over again. And because they are frightened to do that. I know I did this with a child who was on the spectrum. He had a great deal of difficulty making eye contact. He was a 15-year-old. And when I asked him to go around and shake hands with everybody in the room, I wasn't sure if he would do that. Okay, but we practiced going over and over and over again. And what I had him say was, thank you for being here. I just want to let you know that I really want to do well this year. All right, because when we set this up before an IEP meeting, the mom was like already had her battle weapons out, for this IEP meeting. She was ready to roll. And we practiced, and I said, you don't say anything. He's going to come in first, and he's going to thank everybody in the classroom. Well, the result was amazing, because the mom came back, she goes, it was amazing, Marydee. One of the teachers said, I've been doing this for 27 years, and no one has ever thanked me for being at an IEP meeting at 7:30 in the morning. Okay. And before the meeting, she said, and it was amazing. The math teacher started helping him, and so what starts happening is if you come to the teachers with a hand out, thank you for being here, and I want to do well. And like Susan was saying, have one or two things that you really know are going to help your brain do well in school. The teachers will be all over them. It's like, yes, how can I help? They really will.
Yeah, it's all about developing that relationship, establishing some rapport, finding some kernel of silver lining, even among maybe the most difficult teachers. And that's probably one of the hardest things. And you talked about parents coming up, ready for battle. I know with my own teenage boys, my mother bear kicks in, and I have to work really, really hard to be a collaborator, despite my best intentions. And I'm a trained educator. I can imagine how it would be for a parent who is doing the best they very well can, and feeling like they're doing everything they can for the child, and the school is just not meeting the child's needs. That collaborative spirit makes all the difference in the world. I am going to follow up with there's a question that Karen Lerner is asking about extra thoughts for college students, and actually the idea of self-advocacy among college students, whether you have learning accommodations or not, probably about the same advice. Introduce yourself to the teacher during office hours. Make yourself known by way of your strengths and your challenges. Anybody want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I want to say just real quickly, they want to do that the first week of school.
First week of school.
First week, go into that professor's office. I role played with kids to do this because they don't want to. All right. They don't want to do this. Role play, going in and just saying, hi, I'm, and I just want you to know that I have, for instance, dyslexia. And what dyslexia means is that when my brain reads words, it kind of messes things up, and I get confused easily. I think I'm reading the question, for example, on a test, but my brain will switch words around, so I'm answering the wrong question. But anyway, I just want you to know that I want to work really hard in this class because I want to do well. And just doing that, I had a kid turn her whole career around, by going and just meeting all those professors. And they were, again, more than willing to put a lot of time and extra effort into her because she came to them first. It's too late after you fail the first test. Okay, that doesn't work. You need to come in right off the bat.
Great. Susan?
Right. The other issue is that the game changes in college. You have to, can you get the camera on me, sweetie?
It's on.
Right.
Oh, is it? Am I good?
Yep. You can't see it, but we can.
Oh, good. Because you'll know how much I love that. But the thing that changes in college is that now the student must be the advocate. The parent cannot go in and smooth away, talk about their child's needs. This has to come from the student. It's the law. So there has to be a decent rehearsal, and the student, just as Marydee says, does need to be proactive, speak to teachers, and go and get accommodations from the student services. The accommodations usually are nearly impossible to do before every test. In most colleges I work with, you have to request extra time. How much stress can you put on a kid who's time challenged? Well, there's a good one. But nonetheless, that's what it has to be. So parents also need to moderate their anxiety. Trying to force the student to go in and do the right thing may not work. But so understand that the first semester could be a bit dicey if the student has decided, I'm done with all that extra help, I'm done with asking for anything, I'm done with all of it, I'm just going to wing it, I can do it now. And so sitting back, waiting for the evidence, offering help, saying what can I do, and arranging for an ed therapist in private if the student isn't interested in going to the student learning center, just to be able to have somebody who's not the parent to rehearse with, and to convince them that going in to talk to the teachers and taking extra time is actually a really good idea. And developing a master schedule that will be unfairly complex, but which you're going to have to execute to get extra time.
Great, thank you. I'm going to switch gears. We've got a whole bunch of questions here, and I'm being mindful of the time. So I will tell all of you who have posed questions, the three of us can absolutely spend time after the webinar is over answering your questions if we don't get to them within the next 5 or 10 minutes. So rest assured. I'm going to ask the question about a 16-year-old who spends too much time on homework. This throws off all the goals and attempts to manage time. There's partly perfectionism involved, partly old habits from elementary school. The results are kind of a crash and burn in the last few weeks before finals. Marydee, there's a lot of tools out there that aren't working. What are some suggestions that you have for this 16-year-old who's just spending so much time on homework?
Perfectionists are hard to handle because they want to get everything right. So I would go back first to the time scientist piece of just kind of figuring out how long do things take me? What's good enough is another thing to make sure that that's right. You want to make sure that they check in with the teacher. You know, how much do I need to have? Because how fancy does the drawing have to be? How long does the essay? You know, they have to start thinking about seeing everything and how it fits together. That's why when I give a visual schedule of the space of the week and we figure out how much time each homework assignment is going to take, you can set a timer and say, okay, I only have this amount of time for this assignment because the other things are going to start piling up. So it's really seeing the space of time is the key function here, and then getting, you know, letting loose of getting it all right. And I have perfectionistic tendencies, so I get that. You know, they can get lost in the, I get this has got to be perfect what I'm doing, but there just comes a point where it's like good enough, because good enough is probably going to be an A in the class if she's that much of a perfectionist. Okay, but if she's going to get behind, it's not a good thing because then the stress level goes up. I hope that's a little helpful. Yeah, but you have to see the space of time and be honest about how much time it takes and get that from the teacher.
You're getting at some priority setting too. Yeah. So, you know, homework is practice oftentimes. Good enough is really appropriate. And oftentimes with a timer set, you can get as far as you need to get with regard to practice within a short period of time or designated period of time. I would also say on the teacher advocacy side of things is a heads up to the teacher. From the parent or even the 16-year-old couldn't have a conversation with the teacher. I have real trouble finishing my work within designated periods of time. I don't want to fall behind. Here's what my plan is. That's helpful too. Susan.
Well, this is an issue I deal with a great deal with older people. There's a couple pieces to it. Perfectionism is an anxiety symptom. That and it's important to look at, is it that I, as the student, can't let go of the work? I can't let you have it. I need to keep working on it. Is it that kind of problem? Or is it, I can't get started. I'm so anxious about this paper. I have no clue how to plan it. So your job as a therapist parent is then to help the child break down what it is that's keeping them from turning that work in and working on efficiency routines. And also getting help if needed, if that anxiety is severe enough that the student isn't turning in papers, is having incompletes or poor grades, can't make the deadlines even with an extension. There may be time to call in the reserves, which could be a good cognitive behavior therapist to work a little bit on the anxiety. It's quite possible that a medical workup for anxiety is warranted because it's very serious. That perfectionism is an extremely painful adaptation to anxiety, and we need to teach students there are other things we can do. We can tolerate this, we can face it, we can become efficient. We kind of have to. We kind of have to if we want to have any kind of a normal life in school this year.
Thank you. Switching to the teacher side of things, and this is a question I think from teachers actually. How can teachers deal with parents who won't or can't follow through with the structure that their child needs? So if a teacher has made a suggestion for types of structure, given feedback on what they think the child needs, how can the teacher help the parent to establish and maintain that structure?
Who do you want to take that up?
I'll say 2 cents worth. That's tough, okay, because the apple often doesn't fall far from the tree. You have kids that have the issues, the parents also have the issues. That's why when I work with people with Seeing My Time, I work with the family unit because the parents need to be trained also. They need to be thinking about their time. They need to be thinking about their space. They need to be thinking about their organization. So in lieu of doing Seeing My Time with the whole family unit, what you can do, I think it behooves us to accept the fact that some of these people have major challenges, the parents do. So do we punish the child for the fact that the parents don't have it together? So I feel, I know it's extra work for the teacher, but it looks like extra work, but I want that child to succeed. But I might have to adapt a little to help that child be successful. I might have to set things up so that I don't have as much homework demanded because they're going to lose it. I may have to take more time making sure that his binder's organized so that everything is getting home, because you're going to have to be their executive functioning system. Because if their parents aren't able to come to the table, then you're going to have to see what kind of holes you can fill for that child so the child ends up being successful.
Susan?
And I think before we get there, I agree entirely with what Marydee says, but I think it also matters very much to call in the parents, either for a quick meeting or a quick email or a quick phone chat, to say, I've given you a plan. What system can we work on so that I'll know how it's going with you on your end? So in some ways, training the parents to take up the challenge, telling them how they might do that, what it is that you're really expecting. Well, I was hoping that you would check your child's binder and backpack before they come in every day. Or I was hoping that you would monitor time with your child a little bit so that he doesn't overdo the homework, so that he stops at a certain time so I can see exactly what he can get done in 45 minutes. These are the things I was hoping. Keep it simple. Keep the demands on the parents down to 3. Two. Okay, Marydee.
One at a time.
One at a time, but keep the communication open. And then if you really don't have any feedback that helps from the parents, you may need to call in an expert, an ed therapist, some help, CBT therapist, somebody who can help the parents deal with their own disorganization.
Okay, thank you. There's a question from Donna that is about slow processing speed that I think we're going to try to answer offline because I'm mindful of the time. There's 2 other questions that kind of fall in the same category, so I'm going to use the 2 minutes we have to address those. I'll read them verbatim and you can see where the overlap is. So Michelle says, how can one explain to teachers or others that their executive function does not always translate to all areas of the child? For example, if he or she has an intense interest or passion, the executive function skills, or lack thereof, tend to be less problematic in the passion area, but they are a hot mess in other areas such as school and homework. The other question is kind of related, but it's about problem solving and transferring skill. So in the area of problem solving, what causes my 13-year-old son to be able to know how to find out about apps for his phone that are related to fun and social things, but he does not or cannot use those same skills to find apps that could help him with his coursework. So they're in the passion and ability versus not passion, lack of interest, or maybe even a sense of failure and concern that impacts the executive function skills.
Well, the executive function skills are not across the board strengths, just as she said. You can have, given the circumstances, you can have strengths and weaknesses. Even the most ADHD kid can focus on something that's interesting, novel, exciting, dangerous, okay, because it's activating their brain with dopamine reward systems going, okay, that'll keep them going. But something that doesn't activate that part of their brain, they're not interested in. So yeah, the kid's really interested in video game apps, okay? But you know, there's nothing pushing his brain connected to going into school apps. that does not, that he gets no joy and response from that. So he's not going to go there because it's just literally his brain is not activated by that. Yeah, so that's my piece on that one. And yeah, did you want to say something?
Yeah, we're really talking about metacognitive skills here, metacognitive training. strategy one is find something to care about. That's my main and beginning strategy for teaching writing to reluctant writers. What can we possibly find in this book that we can care about? So it's working with finding images, finding some way to activate a child's interest in a subject. It may or may not happen. And the other thing that we can do to help kids is the metacognitive training. If we don't do this, then what? Is that a trade you're willing to make? And maybe it is. You're willing to get a C in the class? Okay, then this is, 75% of the work will get you there. Oh, you don't want a C? You want at least a B minus? Well done you. Here's what we're going to have to master then in order to do that. So I think it's getting a child to begin to understand what mastery is, to be able to call up and retrieve material without a prompt. That takes a lot of practice. So we may just have to institute practices and rewards. When I'm working on teaching a kid to use a schedule, the first thing I do on a great big week's map is say, let's schedule in the sacred reward time now. The untouchable fun time, the untouchable television show, the untouchable time with friends. You're always going to have that. It is doing work. Your value as a person is not dependent on your school performance. It just isn't. Your value as a person is because you're a member of this family, this community, and because you are loved just as you are. Meanwhile, now that we've blocked that out, how can we get some things done to make your school life more fun and easy? Yeah, you hate math and you still have to take it.
Yeah.
So then we might work on that.
Thank you. It is 12 o'clock, and I know we did have a couple more questions out there. What I will suggest is in the follow-up email that we send out, that will include a copy of the handouts as well as a link to the recording of this video. We will answer there's two questions out there, one about managing our own anxiety as parents, and the other is about slow processing speed. So we'll work on those answers. Please note that there are 2 pages of reference within the slideshow. What we've tried to do in the handout is create the links for you to get to the online stuff as well as give you the book references. So those are there. I'm going to turn this back over to Nan, who's going to close us out. Thank you, Marydee. Thank you, Susan. This has been a great conversation.
It's fun.
Yes, it has.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Susan, Marydee, and Laura. This has been absolutely marvelous. And for those of you who want to stay on, if Susan, Marydee, and Laura can stay on a little bit longer, we can keep talking. But for those of you who have to leave, I just have a few announcements that I want to make. And I want to thank everybody in the audience for attending today. You'll receive verification of your attendance by email tomorrow. It will provide documentation of 1 hour of continuing education credit by AET and a link to the handout also and the references for today's program. This webinar was recorded. You'll receive a separate email within a week with a link to the recording. The recording will also be available on the AET website. And we hope that you will share the recording with friends and colleagues. Our next webinar is going to be Mood Disorders in School, Reshaping Best Practices for Clinicians and Classrooms. It takes place on September 17th and will be presented by board-certified educational therapist Paula Dufault and Chrissy Hartley, a parent of a child with a mood disorder. This is an adaptation of Paula and Chrissy's presentation at last year's annual conference, and it's an example of the type of high-level professional development that AET's conferences and workshops offer. So we hope to see you in October at AET's 37th Annual National Conference in the Chicago area, where you can hear more from Marydee when she presents Educational Therapists as Agents of Change, Engaging Parents and Teachers to Build Executive Functions. The full 3-day conference program is on the AET website, www.aetonline.org. And thank you again for joining us today.
Okay, thank you. Susan, Marydee, can you spare a few more minutes to answer questions?
I need to go first because I do have to go somewhere. So I just want to address the slow processing speed. And slow processing speed to me is truly a big challenge. Quite often a challenge when you have a really bright kid who is processing slowly. So there's a book out there some of you may have read, and of course I don't have it right in front of me. I think it's When Bright Kids Can't Keep Up. It was a book that came out this last year. And it's a good book to read because it gives you a perspective on what processing speeds are and how it impacts us, or the students, and also how it impacts them emotionally. The key ideas that I got out of that book is what they call the 3 A's. So the first thing you have to do is accept. You've got to accept that this is a problem and it's going to be there, because that processing speed will improve over age, but the gap will never come together. That's what they're saying, is that it's not like, they're going to get better as they age, but they're never going to come together and be typical. So you have to first come to this acceptance, yourself and the student. As a parent, you have to accept this. And then the next thing that has to happen is that then you have to accommodate. So the first A is accept, the second is to accommodate. That's where we have to get extra time for studying, shortening assignments so they don't have to spend as much time doing things, using external tools like the LiveScribe Echo Smart Pen for taking notes so that they can use that technology if they can't keep up with taking notes. So it's accept, accommodate, and then the third one is to advocate, which we've been talking about a lot, is like, how do I speak up for myself and say, this is the problem I have. I have a wonderful hard drive memory, but I have a dot matrix printer coming in and going out. Really, really slow. And it's not, and we giggled about that, but it can be really, really serious. I have 2 students right now with serious depression who are very, very bright kids, who have that interface, either verbally or written, coming in or going out. Sometimes it's both, sometimes it's one or the other, that just have a lot of challenges. So be accepting, be accommodating, and then become a self-advocate, and help these kids realize that where they're going in the universe, they need to find a match. There's certain places are not matches, because you got to have a really fast brain for some places, but there's other places where you can be much deeper thinker and have a little slower pace, and that's where we want to help these kids understand that that's going to be their match when they grow up.
Thank you.
I would add,
bye-bye, guys.
When we're working with older kids. Bye, Marydee. You going?
Thank you, Marydee.
Yeah, you're welcome. See you later.
Good to see you. The other thing I would add is that processing speed is a lifelong issue, and we need then to make the accommodation of possibly fewer classes. I have a student at Columbia and another at Tulane taking reduced schedules. 5 classes is an invitation to become overwhelmed. These kids are getting help with anxiety and depression through counseling and medication, but also fewer classes, early starts, previewing the reading, finding ways, practicing with me, for instance, how to go from big picture to detail, practicing categorization skills. All these are very, very critical, because as we know, kids with processing issues can be explosive. They get completely exhausted by the act of having to listen and having to try to take in information at a pace they can't do, or they can become very, very withdrawn and anxious. So we have to be on the lookout for the emotional medical side of that, as well as advocate with the students for a reduced schedule that they can handle. It can take them an extra year to graduate, but so what? And then if the school's a poor match, work on that.
Yeah, we call that an extended curriculum in postgraduate work, that there are students who slow down the pace of their learning so that they can master the material. Thank you. And the last question we had was about managing a parent's anxiety with regard to the demands that are placed on a student. So the question itself, I just lost it on the screen. There it is. How to manage my own anxiety, concerns for my son's future. Also, any suggestions on developing study skills when there's anxiety and time management issues?
Yes, I've been reading Daring Greatly this last couple of weeks by Brene Brown, which is very much about how did we all as a culture get into this state where we dread the future for our kids. We worry there won't be jobs. We worry that if they don't go Ivy League, they won't meet the right person to marry. They won't make the right connections. They won't become, the 1%. Well, guess what? A good many of us are not going to enter that highly competitive stratosphere and do well in it. So how can we manage our own anxieties for the sake of our children? I think first thing we have to do is own them. Is to say, this is my fear. I want my child to have a perfect life. None of us have kids so that they can suffer or not do well or ever have a miserable day in their lives. And yet, life is filled with real challenges. So I think we have to understand and admit our own anxiety and grieve whatever wounding we may feel as a result of that. But my only daughter is not a great mathematician like me. She has trouble with this, but my child is suffering from teasing because she's so ADHD and she has such challenges in getting herself together. I think we have to own our own and go ahead and grieve, then we can free up our resources to be helpful. But the other thing is we have to manage our expectations for our children and separate them from our fears as well as our own expectations of ourselves. What is the kind of life I want to have or that I would like to have through my child? We are in an atmosphere of scarcity, as Brene Brown would say, and we have to realize that to have a successful, happy life, we need to be able to connect. We need to be a member in good standing of a group, and we have to be loved and be able to love for ourselves alone. Our education and our work life is supposed to add value to that mission, not the other way around. We aren't born so that we can work away at some job that may or may not make us happy. So I think it's a matter of beginning to investigate our own needs and separate those needs from the needs our children may have and talk to them.
Great. Thank you, Susan. Thank you so much. And at that point, I think we're really done. References will be available within the handout. There is also a separate page in the handout that's got very specific tips and strategies for reading, writing, and math and priming that learning. So thank you, Susan, for providing those. And with that, we are done. Thank you so much, everybody.